Welcome back to Breaking Spines, the miscellaneous book review show for reviewing miscellaneous books. Now, the bond between books and film are tight. Of course, books are the most commonly adapted source material for films, but there's also the novelization industry for people who want to read their movies instead. But today we'll be talking about something a bit odder and a bit rarer. The book sequel to a film that doesn't otherwise have a sequel. There are expanded universe books, sure, but usually if something is worth having a book franchise built around it, it's worth building a film franchise around it. There are some examples where a book was the only sequel to a film for a time, most notably the Star Wars novel Splinter of the Mind's Eye, which came out between A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back, and that was only the case for, 2 years. There are only 2 book sequels without film sequels that I'm aware of. The first is a book sequel to, of all things, the 90s Nickelodeon film Good Burger, which... okay. And the second is a book sequel to Steven Spielberg's 1982 film E.T. the Extra-Terrestrial, a film about a young boy named Elliot who discovers and befriends a stranded alien visitor. It's considered a classic by many, critically beloved, the highest grossing film of the 1980s, the highest grossing film of all time until Jurassic Park came out. It was nominated for Best Picture at the Academy Awards. Phrases like E.T. phone home became part of the pop culture landscape. The iconic image of Elliot and E.T. flying in front of the moon became the logo for Amblin Entertainment. There was an E.T. ride at Universal Studios. Atari made a video game that became famous for entirely different reasons, and it spawned a slew of imitators trying to cash in on its popularity. With all that in mind, it is kind of weird that E.T. never had a sequel. There was more room for a sequel than, say, Jaws, which had 3, but it seems Hollywood's shown some actual restraint on this one. There were plans for a sequel at one point, something called E.T. 2 Nocturnal Fears, which would have been more of a horror movie with Elliot and his friends dealing with a band of evil aliens and having to call E.T. for help. It sounds pretty lame, and Spielberg seems to agree because he shut it down pretty quickly. Instead, if we wanted more adventures with E.T., we'd have to turn to books. This is E.T. The Book of the Green Planet by William Kotzwinkle. Published in 1985 by Berkeley, this story picks up right where the film left off, with E.T. getting picked up by his people and returning to his home planet. We're quick to learn some of the film's unanswered questions, like why was E.T. on Earth in the first place? It turns out he's an intergalactic botanist on a mission to collect plant specimens from other worlds. Fair enough, and it also gives the flower Drew Barrymore's character gifts to E.T. a bit more of significance. E.T. is quickly demoted for getting stranded, which seems a bit harsh. It's not his fault you guys don't do head counts. E.T. travels back to his home planet, and the meat of this book is showing the reader the kinds of wonders this planet has to offer. The E.T. culture largely surrounds nature and the cultivation of nature, with these alien creatures breeding all sorts of fantastical plant creatures, mostly for its own sake. We've got trees that jump around, shrieking flowers, vines that try to startle you, all sorts of weird alien fruits and bushes and whatnot, almost all of them with some form of sentience, many of whom can talk in some manner. There are other intelligent creatures who live here as well, such as the microtechs, tiny mechanically minded builders that remind me a lot of the Doozers from Fraggle Rock. They're the ones who design all the spaceships and equipment. Then you have the flopgloppals, who are kind of like really rubbery ferrets who act foolish, but are certainly smarter and wiser than they appear. There's an ancient race of metallic, mushroom-shaped creatures whom have been banished to underground caves for reasons lost to time. It's all very imaginative, with a capital I. If you are expecting some even vaguely hard science fiction here, you are fresh out of luck. If you were dying to know the biology of E.T., what exactly his magic glowing finger thing is all about, you're not going to get it here. The Book of the Green Planet isn't interested in such things. Its main focus is in presenting fun children's book visuals and lighthearted moments. This book has more in common with L. Frank Baum and Roald Dahl than it does Ray Bradbury and Isaac Asimov. We do get hints of the E.T. culture. For example, only members of the E.T. species that have reached a certain level of enlightenment are allowed names. Everyone else refers to each other by titles like parent or teacher. E.T. is called doctor by his peers. Well, that's interesting, I suppose, but it's not going to scratch the itches of anybody interested in exploring alien societies. This book is pretty much the polar opposite of Dragon's Egg. And there really isn't much of a plot to speak of. E.T. returns to his homeworld, demoted and ashamed, and decides almost immediately to go back to Earth. Sure, he spent the entire movie wanting to get off Earth, and sure, Earth authorities tried to take him and he nearly died, but Elliot was a nice kid, I guess. E.T.'s just never satisfied, ping-ponging between planets and never being happy wherever he is. Now, E.T. is able to observe what's going on Earth and projects some thoughts and attempts to communicate with Elliot, which allows us scenes where we follow up on Elliot's family and what they're doing in the aftermath of the film, which is pretty normal stuff like going to school and shopping. They don't seem to be reacting much to the fact that they just had a alien living with them. There's no real story here either. Surprisingly, Elliot doesn't get a lot of focus in these Earth scenes. The majority of the time, we're following Elliot's mother, Mary, as she goes on dates. It's weird, because every time she encounters an adult man, from the smart computer programmer to the dumpy food court janitor, she mentally considers that man as a potential husband and stepfather to her children. It's straight up crappy 80s sitcom shenanigans. Also, E.T. is projecting and observing Earth from millions of light years away. If these aliens can do things like this, why did E.T. ever need to make a device to phone home? Why couldn't he just project a message back to his ship or the home planet? Why didn't anyone of his kind try to telepathically connect with him? Kotzwinkle, you're destroying the delicate fiction! So, this contrast between 80s sitcom and alien Wizard of Oz goofiness results in what's basically a story about a dejected imaginary friend longing to reconnect with his kid. Except E.T. is not an imaginary friend, but a skin and bones century-old space botanist who drank beer once. If you've seen the movie, it's really hard to buy into E.T.'s motivations here. And the kicker? He never actually gets to Earth. The first half of this book is just him wandering around, just wishing he was back on Earth, and the second half is him trying to come up with a way to leave his planet. He manages to get a ship, blasts off, and the end. Presumably to be picked up in a sequel that never came. If this all feels very slight, that's because it is. And if you're going into this book for the story or the characters or the world building or the themes, you're gonna be a bit disappointed. What you will find, however, are some very pleasantly written passages about fun alien plant life. William Kotzwinkle's strengths in this book clearly lie in whimsical set pieces and giving it all a breezy, just have fun with it atmosphere. Sure, E.T. will do something that he would have had no motivation to do, and you start to wonder why you're 100 pages in and nothing has really happened, but then a flop-glopple will stick a toe in its ear, or E.T. will sing Earth songs to a dancing flower, and you just can't stay mad at a book like this. If you don't consider it as a whole, but instead as a bunch of small vignettes meant for children, it becomes a far more enjoyable book. Which then begs the question, why is this a 250-page novel aimed at adults? At best, it should be an 80-page novelette for third graders. So it was no surprise then when I discovered that there's actually a picture book version of this story aimed for the elementary school set, which really does make a lot more sense. E.T. the Extra-Terrestrial is a film for the child and the child at heart. I don't think it would have lended itself to some kind of grand science fiction franchise, but it does lend itself well to stories about E.T. meeting funny alien plants. So somebody basically took a pitch for a children's book and went, okay, but what if we also made a full-length adult novel version and tried to sell it to the sci-fi geek crowd? I'm not sure why it can't just be a storybook, but you know what? Sci-fi fandom can do with the occasional injection of childlike wonder and whimsy every once in a while. So, would I recommend E.T., the Book of the Green Planet? Well, I get a feeling that I did not read the ideal version of the story. This belongs in a children's book, not a commit an afternoon paperback novel. It's almost plotless, E.T. doesn't really seem to have any proper motivation, and it ends just as the story was building up some steam. But you know what? Despite all of that, it wasn't unpleasant. There's a lot of fun set pieces, and the whole thing has a breezy, comfortable tone that makes it really hard to take seriously. I would still probably opt for the picture book version, but if you find yourself reading this novel, take it in small chunks. Don't try to read it all at once. Maybe even read it out loud to your kids if you have any, and you'll probably find it a positive experience. It's dumb, but it's dumb in a very sincere way that I found charming. And surely it's a better sequel to the film than E.T. Nocturnal Emissions or whatever. So, on to the polls. I think it's time we went back to non-fiction. Well, non-fiction in air quotes. I've got a handful of books here with more, shall we say, contested subject matters, and you get to decide which topic I cover for the next Breaking Spines. Should I read a book about the lost civilization of Atlantis? A book on ESP and other mental powers? Or a book about Armageddon? And yes, I promise it'll be a book about an expired Armageddon. Cast your votes in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and keep on breaking spines.